Alan Ruby. Many of us recognize the chilling image of Pogo the Clown, the unsettling character John Wayne Gacy portrayed in the 1970s, with his painted face and a bundle of bright balloons. This image starkly contrasts with the twisted reality of Gacy's true nature. However, not all eerie photographs are immediately apparent. Often, it's the most ordinary-looking images that hide the darkest secrets. One such example is a photo posted by 19-year-old Alan Ruby on October 12, 2014. The picture, shared on his Instagram with the caption, "College wouldn't be half as great without these two peaches," appears harmless at first glance. But the backstory behind it takes a sinister turn when it's revealed that just 3 days earlier, Ruby had brutally murdered his entire family while pretending to be unaware of the horrific events that transpired in his parents' home. John and Joy Ruby, residents of Duncan, Oklahoma, were well-known figures in the community. Both worked for the local newspaper, the Marlow Review, with John having previously served as the publisher of the Duncan Banner until the family sold the business in 1997. Together, they had 2 children, 17-year-old Catherine, a junior at Duncan High School, and 19-year-old Alan, a student at the University of Oklahoma. The Ruby family was affluent, enjoying a lavish lifestyle. Alan, in particular, was known for his extravagant spending, often treating friends to hotel stays, traveling around Europe, and indulging in designer shoes for himself. Alan Ruby was always adorned with a gleaming Rolex and traveled first class, often looking down on his fellow students who could scarcely afford more than instant noodles for dinner. In a blog post from March 2014, he shared his obsession with luxury and excess, writing, "There is no bigger rush than getting to the register at a store and swiping your credit card. In that moment, you're waiting for the screen to say approved. You start to get heart palpitations and a rush of adrenaline. By the time she hands you your stuff, you are so high on adrenaline that the $15,000 total doesn't even faze you until you're home and see the receipts." But Ruby's taste for the good life had gotten wildly out of hand in the months leading up to the murders. In January 2014, he pleaded guilty to a charge of credit card theft after stealing his grandmother's card. He owed $491 in fines and court costs, and was scheduled to appear again in court on November 12 for his final sentencing. His parents had paid for him to go on a trip to Europe, but he had used his grandmother's credit card to pay for the experiences he had while there, racking up $5,000 in charges. 2 years before that, he had reportedly assaulted his own mother after they fought about his spending habits. She opted not to press charges. By the time of the murders, he owed $3,000 to a loan company and was being investigated for having stolen and forged $17 a half $1,000 worth of checks. The theft of his grandmother's credit card, though, was the final straw for Joy and John, who cut Ruby off financially. The family's housekeeper, Rosie, later testified that Joy had tearfully told her about the things she'd heard from a friend. Reportedly, Ruby was going around telling his friends he was going to kill us. On the morning of October 13, 2014, Rosie called the police. She was distressed and shocked and explained that she had turned up to work to find 3 Ruby family members dead. One neighbor recalled being baffled by the triple murder, stating, "They were a good family. They would always help you out. If your car wouldn't start, they'd come over and jump it, or if your dog ran off, they'd try to help you catch it. Just neighborly things." Rosie told investigators that she was not sure whether or not to report to work on the morning of 13th, as she hadn't heard from Joy. She decided to err on the side of caution and showed up at the family home anyway, where before long she discovered the bodies. Joy was on the kitchen floor, John face down in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. The family had been dead for 4 days. Hours after the bodies of his family were discovered, Ruby was arrested in connection with the credit card theft case. When informed that his parents and sister were dead, he began, quote, wailing and crying and having a hard time. Eventually, investigators said he settled down enough for them to interview him. They noted that at this point, Ruby had become their number 1 suspect in the murders, and it wasn't long before he confessed. Ruby told detectives that on October 9th, he had taken his father's gun and approached his mother first in the kitchen. When Joy turned to him, he shot her in the head. However, After collapsing on the floor, she still showed signs of life, so Ruby shot his mother once again. His 17-year-old sister, Catherine, was outside, but came in possibly after hearing the commotion. As she stepped into the kitchen, he shot her once. Ruby believed she died instantly. His father, John, was the last one to die because he had been at work all day. When he returned home about an hour after Catherine and Joy were shot, he entered the kitchen only to be met by his son. Ruby fired the gun, shooting his father in the head. Like his mother, though, his father was still alive when he hit the ground, so Ruby fired again. Following the murders, Ruby ransacked the house to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He took the footage from his family's at-home surveillance system and fled to his university campus. He disposed of the gun and surveillance footage in a lake en route. He later traveled to Dallas, where his university was playing a sports match against the University of Texas, though he didn't attend the game. He then stayed with friends at the Ritz-Carlton in Dallas. Ruby also admitted to police that he left his phone behind when he traveled to Duncan so that his real location wouldn't be given away if investigators looked into it. He reportedly posted photos of the view from his dorm room on the night of the murders. Alan Ruby believed that by eliminating his family, he could inherit their wealth, clear his debts, and maintain his extravagant lifestyle. In 2016, Ruby pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder as part of a plea agreement that spared him from the death penalty, which the prosecution had initially sought. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As part of the plea deal, Ruby agreed not to contact his relatives, not to profit from his crimes through book or movie deals, and not to communicate with the media. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Carol Barrett. In March 1980, Carol Barrett, an 18-year-old from Zanesville, Ohio, set off on what was meant to be a fun spring break trip with her friends to Daytona Beach, Florida. However, the trip took a tragic turn when Carol was kidnapped from her motel room by an armed man. Despite her friends' desperate attempts to save her and extensive police efforts, Carol's body was discovered days later near Jacksonville, Florida, far from where she was last seen. For decades, her brutal slaying remained unsolved. Carol Ann Barrett was born and raised in the tight-knit community of Zanesville, Ohio, known for its strong family values. As one of 6 children, Carol grew up in a lively household filled with love and support. Her family was close, and the sense of community was always a defining part of her life. Wayne and Patricia Barrett, Carol's parents, were actively engaged in their children's lives, ensuring they had a stable and supportive upbringing. From an early age, Carol displayed resilience and independence, earning the admiration of both her family and friends. Her level-headedness and practicality were qualities that made her well-liked and respected by those who knew her. Carol possessed a calm demeanor and the ability to manage stressful situations with poise, qualities that her family believed would benefit her as she grew older. By the age of 18, Carol had cultivated a wide range of interests and a strong sense of direction for her future. As a dedicated member of her high school band, she enjoyed the travel and performance opportunities it provided. One standout trip to Colorado sparked a love for exploring new places, further fueling her desire to experience the world. This subsequently fueled her desire to plan a spring break trip to Daytona Beach, Florida. Carol's father, Wayne Barrett, had reservations about the trip but relented. He knew how much it meant to his daughter. Carol had worked part-time at a Wendy's restaurant to save up for the trip for nearly a year. As spring break approached, the excitement was palpable. On March 20, 1980, Carol and her friends embarked on a road trip to Florida, driving through the night. Once they arrived, they checked into the Treasure Island Inn, a well-known oceanfront hotel in Daytona Beach shores. Eager to enjoy their time away, the group quickly headed to the beach, excited for a week of fun and relaxation in the Florida sun. However, their vacation took a chilling turn in the early hours of March 23rd. After a night of socializing in the girls' oceanfront room on the 6th floor, Carol and a friend, 18-year-old Scott Grubb, left to visit a nearby store. This was around 2 a.m. As Carol and Scott made their way towards the elevator, they were suddenly confronted by a man waving a gun. The assailant aggressively forced them back towards their motel room. He demanded that they re-enter. Worried about the intruder's motives, their friend Steve insisted they couldn't access the room because they didn't have a key. However, the gunman was undeterred and shoved Steve toward the door. In fear, both Steve and Carol banged on the door until one of their friends opened it from the inside. Upon entering, the gunman seemed momentarily startled by the number of people in the room but quickly regained composure. He ordered everyone to remove their clothes and, after a tense exchange, took about $200 in cash from the group. Then, stating his need for a hostage to facilitate his escape, he initially chose 17-year-old Pam Queen. But when Pam reacted with immediate hysteria, he reconsidered. He muttered that she would be too problematic. Instead, Carol volunteered to go in her place. She opted to keep calm under pressure. The gunman instructed Carol to dress while he corralled the others, still undressed, onto the balcony. He assured them that Carol would be released within an hour. He then locked the sliding glass door behind them as he escorted Carol out of the room. Carol's friends shouted for help, but when no one responded, they knew they had to take action. One of the boys daringly crossed to an adjacent balcony. He carefully avoided a dangerous 70-foot drop. Once there, he alerted the surprised residents. They then immediately called the police. The police response was quick, but the kidnapper and Carol had a 20-minute head start. The initial search was hampered by the lack of witnesses or any clue of the vehicle used. Carol's friends provided a detailed description of the man to the police. Described as a man in his early 20s, around 5 feet 10 inches tall with reddish-brown hair. He had a beard, mustache, and a distinctive mole on his left cheek. He was last seen wearing a brown suede jacket, tan pants, and gold aviator-style glasses. Despite this detailed description, the leads were slim. The hopes that Carol would be released within an hour faded as sunrise came and went. As the hours passed with no sign of Carol, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Pam, taking on the painful duty of informing Carol's parents, relayed the devastating news. Carol's father, Wayne, who had been initially reluctant about the trip, was overwhelmed with worry. He tried his best to hold on to hope due to Carol's known resilience and level-headedness. As dawn broke with no word from or about Carol, her parents, alongside her friends, clung to the hope instilled by the abductor's words. They prayed for her safe return. The FBI joined the investigation. They assisted local authorities by interviewing other guests and staff at the Treasure Island Inn. Unfortunately, no useful information emerged. The next day, Daytona Beach detectives were alerted to the discovery of a young woman's body in a remote area near the Jacksonville airport. This is almost 100 miles from where Carol was last seen. Found 30 feet from Interstate 95, the woman was dressed similarly to Carol at the time of her abduction. 2 of Carol's friends traveled to Jacksonville to identify the body. They confirmed everyone's worst nightmare. Carol had met a violent end. Carol's friends and family, who held on to hope of her safe return, were devastated by the grim discovery. Despite initial promises by the abductor that she would be released, her life was senselessly taken much too soon. When discovered, Carol showed no obvious injuries despite some dried blood on her face. An autopsy later revealed she had been fatally shot once in the back of her head. This was done with a small caliber gun. She was found partially clothed with her upper body exposed. Her white sweater was over her head and her t-shirt nearby. Her jewelry remained intact. The autopsy also noted that she was assaulted. There were no defensive wounds. This suggested that Carol was probably unaware of the imminent danger and was shot execution style, likely without warning. Detectives facing a lack of leads relied on the description from Carol's friends to create a composite sketch of the suspect. This sketch was distributed to police across the country, to toll collectors on major East Coast highways, and featured in local newspapers and on television. Detectives pored over every detail from forensic evidence at the crime scene to interviews with potential witnesses. They even analyzed traffic camera footage and questioned known criminals in the area. They took a close look at similar crimes in neighboring states, hoping for a breakthrough that would link the cases. Even after the suspect's sketch was widely circulated, weeks turned into months without any significant leads. Years passed and Carol's family, while devastated, continued to work with law enforcement. They urged them to keep the case open and the public engaged. Each year, on the anniversary of Carol's disappearance, local newspapers would feature stories reminding the community of the unresolved crime. They hoped to jog someone's memory or conscience, but eventually, the case went completely cold. It was not until August 2017 that Carol's case was reopened by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit after a detailed review of the evidence. A few years later in 2020, a significant breakthrough came when 65-year-old Billy Mansfield Jr. was identified as a suspect. He is a convicted serial offender and was already imprisoned since 1982 for the slayings of multiple other women. Mansfield, who was 24 at the time of Carol's tragic demise, confessed in September 2022 to being the person depicted in the initial police sketch. His confession happened after multiple interviews lasting over 2 years. He admitted to both the abduction and the violent crime. Mansfield had been convicted in 1982 of brutally taking the lives of 5 different women across California and Florida. His home in Hernando County, Florida, had the gruesome discovery site of 4 sets of human remains during the initial investigations. 2 of these remains were identified quickly, but 2 remained unidentified until 2022. Deputies did not say how the search was narrowed to Mansfield, but Dan Jansen, Jacksonville's Sheriff's Office Cold Case Supervisor, said that the Sheriff's Office had a partial palm print from the suspect to accompany the police sketch. Although he confessed to the Carol Barrett case in 2024, authorities chose not to pursue further prosecution. Mansfield is already serving a life sentence in California and 4 concurrent life sentences in Florida for his previous convictions. After almost 44 years, this breakthrough provided some closure to Carol's family. This confirmed the identity of the perpetrator after years of agonizing uncertainty. Blair Gilligan, Carol's niece, said she was 3 years old when her aunt's life was taken, but does remember her. She wants others to remember her as well. Blair had no memory of the day she nearly drowned as a small child, but she does know she is here today because of her Aunt Carol. She jumped in and pulled me out and gave me CPR until the ambulance came. She was a hero multiple times over. Even though Carol was young herself, Claire said she was like a second mom to me. I can remember her giving me baths, and do you remember those little oil bath beads? She would always use those. I can remember her making me corn with mozzarella cheese in it. No-bake cookies were Carol's absolute favorite, and they are also yours. Claire shared that Carol was a loving daughter, sister, and friend, a person who was trustworthy and easy to confide in, making anyone feel comfortable around her. While the resolution of the case brings some closure, it's bittersweet, as there will be no prosecution of Mansfield due to his existing life sentences. Carol's family will never see him specifically held accountable for her tragic fate. Ryan Bachman, the founder of Project Cold Case, noted that for some families, knowing who the perpetrator was and that they're no longer out there harming others is enough closure. Moving on to the next case. Evansdale murders. Evandale, a small city in Black Hawk County, Iowa, is located just 10 miles southeast of Waterloo, the 4th most populous city in the state. For years, the town, with a population of around 5,000, enjoyed a peaceful existence. However, since 2012, this quiet area has become associated with a violent crime that would forever haunt its residents, leaving two families in desperate search of answers. This is the case of the Evansdale murders. Lyric Ray Lynn Cook was born on October 2, 2001, in Waterloo, Iowa, to Dan and Misty Morrissey. Lyric also had a brother named Dylan, with whom she shared a close bond. Both of Lyric's parents struggled with drug abuse, and as a result, Lyric was primarily raised by her grandmother, Wilma Cook. She attended Kingsley Elementary School in Waterloo, where she enjoyed playing outside, bowling, cheerleading, and gymnastics. Lyric was often described as a special young lady with an infectious personality, bringing joy to everyone around her. Lyric had a deep compassion for both her family and friends. She particularly enjoyed spending time with her grandmother, often playing card games together in the afternoons. Elizabeth June Marie Collins was born on July 3, 2003, at Allen Memorial Hospital in Waterloo, Iowa, to Drew and Heather Collins. Elizabeth grew up with three siblings, one brother named Kelly and two sisters named Amber and Kelly. She loved playing with her siblings, often taking the lead and ordering them around. Elizabeth had a bubbly personality and loved dressing up, getting her nails and hair done. She enjoyed singing, riding her bike, and playing softball and hockey. A student at Pointer Elementary School in Evansdale, she also had a dog named Gus, with whom she had become inseparable. Lyric's mother, Misty, and Elizabeth's mother, Heather, were sisters, which made Lyric and Elizabeth cousins. The two girls often played together, especially since Lyric spent a lot of time with her grandmother. During the summer holidays of 2012, Lyric and Elizabeth were spending a lot of time together at their grandmother, Wilma's house, where often played cards and rode their bicycles together. On July 13, 2012, Lyric and Elizabeth were on one such bicycle ride around Evansdale. The girls' grandmother saw the girls riding their bike at around 12:15 p.m. near downtown Evansdale. The girls were seen at about 12:23 on Broven Boulevard in Evansdale, and then spotted between 12:30 and 1 p.m. on Gilbert Drive, which was about 1.5 miles from their grandmother's house. The area was not far from Myers Lake, a popular fishing and recreational area. That was the last time Lyric and Elizabeth were seen alive. About 2 hours later, when the girls hadn't returned to their grandmother's house, their family began searching for them, calling friends and relatives to see if anyone had seen the girls. When they couldn't find any leads, the family contacted the police at 2:48 p.m. The Evansdale police began canvassing the area, and hundreds of volunteers from the community joined in the search for the missing cousins. Black Hawk sheriffs and the local fire department also joined in to search for the missing girls. At 4 p.m., the bikes belonging to Lyric and Elizabeth were found by local firefighters on a trail on the southeast corner of Myers Lake. Elizabeth's purse, which had a cell phone in it, was also found about 25 feet away just on the other side of the fence, but Lyric and Elizabeth were nowhere to be found. The cell phone was used by the girls to play games and was not activated to make phone calls. When the bicycles were found, it became apparent that the girls were in imminent danger, and that time was of the essence. Flyers were posted throughout the community, urging for the safe return of the girls. The police intensified their search and brought in divers from Cedar Valley Underwater Search and Rescue to help search Myers Lake. Officers carefully paddled around the lake in kayaks, and a group of 3 officers walking along the southeast shoreline discovered a cup. One of the officers, wearing gloves and carrying an evidence bag, picked up the cup and took it back to a patrol car parked along the bank. Officials didn't identify the object or even confirm whether it was related to the search. After several days of setback, the lake was partially drained, but they failed to find anything. Agents from FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team were also called in for the search. Meanwhile, volunteers, searchers and sniffer dogs searched around the lake and trails. Police even followed the sanitation crews as they collected trash throughout the community. However, nothing came of it. The police conducted hundreds of interviews and retrieved footage from security cameras. The girls were seen on one security footage obtained from an auction house in an alley located a short distance away from their grandmother's house. Soon, a tip line turned up numerous reports of articles of clothing that had been found, but none belonged to the girls. Tips came from across the United States as it gained national attention. The police began to question registered sex offenders and anyone recently arrested for the sexual abuse or enticement of a minor in the area. Many of them were interviewed several times and were even asked to take a polygraph test. Unfortunately, all of them were cleared. The family and friends of the girls were also questioned and interviewed. The family members agreed to have their phones and personal computers taken for examination, but there was no sign of any suspicious activity, and all of them were cleared. Within the next few months, police began investigating Lyric's parents, Dan and Misty, although they did say they were not suspects in the disappearance. Dan and Misty were divorced, but both parents had a history of drug abuse and her father had a history of making drugs in the house while the children were home, including the day they disappeared. Dan specifically had numerous charges going back to the 1990s, which included crimes from burglary to possession and distribution of methamphetamines in large quantities. Not long before the girls vanished, Dan was also charged with physical assault on Misty, and at the time of the girls' disappearance, he had a restraining order against him preventing him from contacting Misty. Dan was scheduled in court to testify against people he had meth deals with shortly after the girls' disappearance. At the time, Dan had pending cases against him, charging him with possessing, dealing and making methamphetamine and a range of other drug charges that could lock him up for decades if convicted. A year and a half after the girls went missing, Dan was sentenced to 90 years in prison for drug charges. Misty also had a checkered past and was convicted in 2014 for several crimes, which included excessive alcohol and drug-related offenses. She only served a short time in prison and would be released a year later. Despite their offenses, both parents maintained they had nothing to do with the girls' disappearance. Despite extensive investigation, no new update would be received for months. Then, on December 5, 2012, hunters came across two deceased bodies in the Seven Bridges Wildlife Park near Reedland in Bremer County, a wildlife area about 25 miles from where the girls were last seen. They contacted law enforcement officials at 12:45 p.m. The next day, Chief Deputy Rick Aubin with the Black Hawk County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to announce officials were confident that the bodies were those of Lyric and Elizabeth. Aubin said there were no other missing persons cases and the remains found were of a smaller stature. The bodies were transported to the State Medical Examiner's Office in Ankeny for a positive on December 10, 2012. The Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the bodies found were those of Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins. On February 6, 2013, officials announced that the trail and park at Myers Lake would be renamed to honor the memory of Lyric and Elizabeth. The trail that runs around the lake is now known as the Trail of Angels. The park next to the lake will also be known as Angels Park. The city also declared July 13th as Lyric and Elizabeth Day. According to the police, the area where the bodies were found was very isolated and not many people knew about it, suggesting that the perpetrator was familiar with the park. Authorities would never reveal the cause of death of the girls and other crucial information relating to the murder. This is usually done to help avoid false confessions, which actually did happen in this case. In 2012, the police would receive two separate confessions claiming to be the killer. The authorities, however, were able to quickly rule them out as they were not able to share any information that wasn't already revealed to the public. On June 24, 2013, 6 months after their bodies were found, authorities announced that they had 3 different witnesses who told police they saw a white full-sized older model SUV similar to a Chevy Suburban or Ford Bronco parked on Arbutus Avenue on July 13th, the day the girls vanished. Arbutus Avenue meets the bike trail where the girls' bicycles were located. The vehicle was described as a large and clunky white SUV and an old-style boxy Suburban. Two of the witnesses had reported seeing this white SUV parked between the bike trail signs. The other witness told police that they saw the vehicle parked near the woods on the east side of the lake, which was only a few 100 feet away from where the bikes were found. All three witnesses say they had seen the SUV sometime between 11:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. There was some criticism as to why police didn't reveal the vehicle information sooner. It was found that while two witnesses came forward during the initial canvassing of the area, the third witness would come forward almost a year later because they assumed someone had already told police, and that police just didn't know if the information was of any significance at the time. After the third witness came forward, the police forwarded this tip to the media and asked for anyone with information to come forward. Around the same time on May 20th, 2013, Kathleen Shepard and Desi Hughes were walking home from their school when they were lured into a pickup truck by a man. The man drove the girls around in his truck for some time before he took them to a hog confinement site where he zip-tied their hands together. The man then took Kathleen to another part of the property. When he left, Desi was able to escape and went for help. When the police arrived at the scene, they located his truck and found him dead inside. He had taken his own life. There were, however, no signs of Kathleen. Hundreds of police officers and volunteers scoured the network of rural roads and trails in the search for the 15-year-old, deploying aircrafts and sniffer dogs. Kathleen's body would be found a few weeks later on June 7, 2013 in the Des Moines River about 20 miles downriver from the pig farm. She had been stabbed and beaten to death. The police quickly identified the kidnapper as Michael Kundar, a registered sex offender from Stratford, Iowa. Kundar had spent years in and out of prison, including time served for a 1991 conviction on charges that he kidnapped and assaulted a woman and kidnapped two 3-year-olds. Luckily, all of the victims had survived. The abduction came less than a year after the disappearance of Lyric and Elizabeth Cook and less than 100 miles from Evansdale. Moreover, Klunder had recently been released from prison in 2011. All of this led police to wonder if Klunder had anything to do with Lyric and Elizabeth's murders. However, on May 14, 2014, police pretty confidently said that Michael Klunder was no longer a person of interest in the Lyric and Elizabeth case. In July of 2017, a 58-year-old man named Jeff Altmeyer was arrested when he tried to lure away two elementary school girls while they were returning from school. It was found that he had been enticing children all over Iowa and Ottawa, Jasper, and Grundy counties. In fact, in 2016, Jeff had attempted to lure dozens of children into his car. He was also a suspect in at least 2 other cases of sexual assault on underage girls. He would later be sentenced to life in prison for these crimes. Police investigated him as a potential lead in the Evansdale murders, but so far there is no evidence linking him to the crimes. Jeff is still a person of interest in the Evansdale murders. In 2018, 36-year-old Teresa Guillermone crossed the train tracks with her 8-year-old son as the train approached, but then returned to the center of the tracks as the train drew near and pulled her son onto the tracks at the last moment, killing both of them instantly. Police at first thought it was a tragic accident, but after checking the CCTV footage and talking to Teresa's friends, police realized it was a murder-suicide. During their investigations, police found out that Teresa had told her community support specialists at Genesis Development, Julie Croft and Belle Plain, that she had kept a 6-page letter in a box in her house. The letter was written by the men who had supposedly killed Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins. Teresa said she used to hang around with these men and that they had admitted to the crime. Investigators executed a search warrant taking several items from Teresa's home. Other items found while executing the search warrant included 4 cell phones, 2 notebooks, and 2 sealed envelopes that said, "To Jeremiah from Henry" and "To Phaedra from Henry." Teresa's son was named Henry. They also found a 6-page letter, but it did not contain any additional information that Julie hadn't already told them about. Teresa also told Julie that her medications made her feel like standing in front of a train about 3 months ago. During the investigation, authorities also found that she didn't have much for immediate family. Both her parents were deceased, and she had no siblings. Police believe that Teresa's mental health probably made it hard for her to differentiate what was real and what was not. It is unknown if Teresa and her son's death were linked to the Evansdale murders. Over the last few years, some have speculated that Lyric and Elizabeth's murders might be related to the February 2017 murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German in Delphi, Indiana. There were some similarities in the two murders, but police have since ruled out any connection between the two murders. The Evansdale Police Department has said that the perpetrator is likely to be local, and the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the BU, has analyzed the case and believed that one person is responsible for the abduction and murders and released an outline of the offender's profile. The offender is believed to be familiar with both Myers Lake and Seven Bridges Wildlife Area in Bremer County. The offender selected Seven Bridges because he was familiar with how secluded the area is. The offender blends in with and maybe is part of the Evansdale, Bremer, and surrounding communities. The perpetrator most likely used quiet coercion to gain compliance, such as a ruse or threats of violence to get the girls to leave with him. During July 2012, the perpetrator may have been experiencing stress due to spousal problems, financial difficulties, legal trouble, employment difficulties, or mental health issues. The offender might avoid discussing the case or could show interest in following media coverage of the developments. They may not have a history of abducting or attempting to abduct other children or adults. After the disappearance, the suspect may have altered their appearance, changing their hairstyle or facial hair. The offender's vehicle could have been hidden, suddenly sold, or modified, with a new paint job or reupholstered interior. Police have followed up on more than 1,000 leads and interviewed over 300 sex offenders, yet the case remains unsolved. If you have any information about the murders of Lyric and Elizabeth, please contact the authorities. Moving on to the next case. Gary Lee Haney. On January 3, 1979, a duck hunter stumbled upon human remains belonging to a male, tangled in fishing line on the tide flats near Spencer Island, just south of Marysville, Washington. The Snohomish County Coroner's Office labeled the victim John Doe 791, as he was the first John Doe found that year. Despite efforts from Coroner Robert Phillips, the cause of death remained unclear. By March 1979, the man had still not been identified, and the Cassidy Funeral Home laid him to rest at Cypress Lawn Cemetery in Everett, Washington. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office later revisited the location where the remains were discovered, but found no additional evidence. Over the years, the case went cold. In 2008, Detective Jim Scharf from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team, alongside retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Cousert, began to re-examine the unidentified persons case. With advancements in DNA technology, they hoped to exhume the remains to collect DNA samples that had not been taken during the initial investigation. However, the process of reviewing the case, obtaining exhumation permits, and conducting DNA testing would take several years. In July 2015, the remains of the John Doe were exhumed from Cypress Lawn Cemetery, with officials from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office present. The remains were then transported to the Medical Examiner's Office for further examination and given the name Spencer Island Doe. Additionally, forensic odontologist Dr. Kyle Tanaka took dental radiographs and uploaded them to NCIC in Namas, hoping to find a match with the missing person. NCIC, the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, is a computerized system that tracks crimes and missing persons, allowing law enforcement agencies nationwide to compare cases. However, no dental matches were found in the NCIC database. In April of 2016, forensic artist Natalie Murray took measurements and photographs and drew a facial reconstruction of what the John Doe may have looked like in life. In April of 2016, Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist at the King County Medical Examiner's Office, performed an examination of the remains and estimated that they belonged to an adult male with Caucasian ancestry between 50 to 56 in height and between 27 to 61 years old. In September of 2018, a section of the right femur was sent to the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center for DNA extraction and was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index system. From 2018 to 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner investigators ruled out numerous missing persons by circumstances, testing, and dental records. In 2021, the Medical Examiner's Office began collaborating with Othram Inc. to obtain an advanced DNA profile suitable for investigative genetic genealogy. In January of 2021, a section of the femur bone from Spencer Island John Doe was sent to Othram. The funding for the laboratory work in this case was generously provided through DNAsolves.com. In May of 2021, Othram successfully obtained a DNA extract that was sufficient for testing after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. Biogeographical analysis of the DNA profile revealed that the John Doe was in fact Caucasian. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office uploaded the Othram DNA profile to genealogical databases that allow law enforcement to search and obtain several matches. Adam Wilcoxon built ancestry trees from several of the top matches and found a male who went missing in the Everett, Washington area in the late 1970s named Gary Lee Haney. DNA reference testing of Gary's half-sister ultimately confirmed that Spencer Island Doe was Gary Lee Haney, who was about 29 years old when he went missing. The identification was made in March of 2023. Gary was apparently not reported missing, or at least investigators found no record of that. He was born in Topeka, Kansas, and traveled the world with his mother and adoptive father who was in the Air Force. Gary loved the Beatles and to play the piano. His parents both passed away when he was young and he got estranged from the rest of his relatives, so the only photos of him are as a child. The circumstances of his disappearance are not known. Gary's cousin, Hal Thane from Texas, was able to provide a lot of information. He said, "It is a relief and closure to know about Gary." He also said that Gary Lee Haney was born Gary Joseph Condomiti on September 23, 1950. His mother, Bernice Schaefer, and his biological father divorced when he was very young. Around 1955, his mother remarried to Sheldon Lee Haney, who adopted him and renamed him Gary Lee Haney, legally changing even his middle name to match his stepfather. Hal Thane, now 71, saw his cousin Gary in person, maybe twice in his life, when they were both kids. His uncle Sheldon served in the Air Force, so the family lived in places all across the country from Kansas to New York City. His clearest memories of his cousin are captured in a few precious black and white pictures. Young Gary, cradling a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Young Gary, holding a bigger dog's leash beside his mother in a pale dress, and his stepfather in a white dress shirt and slacks. Young Gary, with his front teeth peeking out from a half-smile on what looks like a school picture day. Hal Thane said Gary had some sort of a mental disorder. Given what he knows, he wonders if Gary lived with autism. He'd heard another family member describe him as schizophrenic in adulthood. Gary's biological father, Joseph Condomiti, passed away at a Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was about 16. His mother passed away when he was 19. His adoptive father completed his military service and worked at Boeing until his retirement. The family lived in the Everett area from the early 1970s until at least 1990. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the Snohomish Police Department at 360-568-0888. Moving on to the next case. Helen Terry. On August 28, 1980, a young mother was brutally murdered in her Sacramento, California apartment. The crime scene, marked by 13 stab wounds and a terrified 1-year-old crawling through the aftermath, became one of the city's most enduring unsolved cases for over 4 decades. Investigators faced numerous challenges in identifying Helen Terry's killer until, decades later, an arrest was finally made. Helen, 27 years old, lived in the Orangewood West Apartments on Wyndham Drive in Sacramento. Known for her deep devotion to her family, Helen was a loving and hardworking mother, determined to provide the best life possible for her 1-year-old son. At the center of Helen's life at the time was an ongoing paternity suit against Robert Terry, who was believed to be the biological father of her son. Helen was seeking child support from Robert in the hope of securing financial stability for her child's future. On August 28, 1980, a neighbor witnessed a disturbing scene unfold outside Helen's apartment. The neighbor saw a man aggressively pounding on her door, followed by chaotic sounds from inside the apartment. Shuffling noises and blood-curdling screams echoed through the walls. The commotion outside painted a terrifying picture of the violence unfolding behind closed doors. Fearing for her own safety, the neighbor hesitated to intervene and could not call the police, as she didn't have a phone. Shortly afterward, another resident in the complex complained of water leaking into their unit. When the apartment manager entered Helen's apartment to investigate the leak, he discovered a horrifying scene. Helen had been brutally stabbed 13 times and was left to die on the bathroom floor. The water that had caused concern was from a running faucet, adding to the disarray of the crime scene. Her 1-year-old son was found alone in the apartment. Crawling through the aftermath of the vicious attack, the police were immediately called to the scene, and investigators quickly began piecing together what had transpired. Blood stains were scattered throughout the apartment, and furniture was overturned, indicating a violent struggle had taken place. It was clear that Helen had fought desperately against her attacker before succumbing to her fatal injuries. Despite the clues left behind, including the chaotic state of the apartment and the extensive blood evidence, identifying a suspect would prove to be a challenging task. Sacramento police launched an intense investigation into Helen's slaying. They combed through the evidence, interviewed residents, and pursued every possible lead in hopes of catching the perpetrator. A $2,500 reward was offered to encourage anyone with information to come forward. However, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community's desire for justice, no suspect was identified. The case gradually grew cold as detectives found themselves unable to develop any tangible leads or witnesses to push the investigation forward. Years went by with no answers, and Helen's case remained one of Sacramento's many unsolved cases. However, in 2016, hope was reignited when an investigator from the department's cold case unit decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. With advances in DNA technology, investigators were then able to re-examine the physical evidence collected from the crime scene in the hope of finding new leads. As the cold case team processed the old evidence, a major breakthrough occurred. DNA found at the crime scene of Helen pointed to a familiar name, Robert Terry, the man Helen had been embroiled in a paternity and child support dispute with at the time of her demise. This discovery immediately raised suspicions, as Robert had been a figure in Helen's life during a tumultuous period. But he had never been formally charged or named a suspect in the years following her slaying. Despite the promising DNA evidence linking Robert to the crime scene, detectives faced significant challenges. They needed more than just a DNA match to build a solid case against him. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position, knowing that while the DNA provided a potential lead, it was not enough to definitively place Robert at the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. There were still gaps in the timeline and insufficient corroborating evidence to bring charges against him. In 2024, new developments in Helen's case emerged when the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office Cold Case, Science and Technology Unit took on the decades-old investigation. Using advanced investigative methods, detectives uncovered enough new evidence to finally charge Robert Terry with the slaying of Helen Terry. On September 27, 2024, 81-year-old Robert, residing in Rancho Cordova, was arrested and booked into Sacramento County Jail. Authorities have not yet confirmed whether Robert was the biological father of Helen's 1-year-old son. Their contentious relationship, compounded by the unresolved paternity dispute, remained at the center of the investigation. The police continued to examine their interactions and what role the paternity issue may have played in the motive behind the slaying. Robert Terry is set to appear in court for a bail hearing on October 17, where further details about the case may come to light. His arrest at this late stage in life brought a shocking conclusion to a cold case that had stumped detectives for over 4 decades. Helen's brother, John Mays, said, "She was very kind, very loving. That's why we can't even imagine something like that happening to her. It was totally uncalled for. We've been wondering since day one, and this is the first bit of hope we've had since then, and we're going to take it as far as we can. We had suspicions, but there wasn't much we could do with just suspicions. When it finally came down to us, it was like a huge relief, like something we had known all along but could never prove." Moving on to the next case. Catherine Namath. In October 2002, Catherine Namath visited her parents' cabin on Noon Lake, Wisconsin, on a rainy night. The cabin was empty as her parents had left earlier that day for their winter home in Florida. Namath had stopped by to grab some food from the freezer. A few minutes after arriving, she called for help on her radio. She used her radio identification number saying, "This is 96. There's a man with a raincoat, and he's scruffy looking," and then the radio went dead. Her husband tried to contact her by radio without success. He then decided to go to the cabin with their son. When they arrived at the cabin, they found Namath lying on the floor. She was still breathing and was semi-conscious. They asked her if she knew the attacker, but she said she didn't know. She died while being airlifted to the hospital. Officials said that nothing was stolen and that it didn't appear to be a random attack. Evidence from the cabin showed that she was chased through the property trying to fight off her attacker but received multiple stab wounds. Police have DNA evidence but have been unable to match it to anyone. Some speculated that the killing might be linked to an embezzlement investigation involving her husband and 3 others from the Elko Fire Department Board. The investigation was eventually resolved when the former treasurer admitted to embezzling at least $3,500 and was dismissed. Despite this, there have been no suspects or new leads, and Catherine's murder remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Kathy and Small. On February 22, 1986, a woman's body was discovered on a remote road in South Pasadena, California. The scene was chilling, with the victim found wearing only a nightgown, having been both stabbed and strangled. Kathy and Small, a devoted mother, had her life cruelly taken. The pursuit of justice for her murder would span 3 decades, but a shocking revelation eventually emerged, linking her case to one of California's most notorious serial offenders. Born in 1967, Kathy Ann Small was known for her loving and caring nature, especially when it came to her family. By the time she turned 19, Kathy was already a mother of 2 young children, fully embracing the responsibilities of motherhood while also being a protective big sister and devoted daughter. On the morning of February 22, 1986, a woman's body was found on a road in South Pasadena. She was dressed only in a nightgown, and it was evident that she had endured a violent attack. Authorities observed that she had been both stabbed and strangled, with no identification found at the scene. Her lifeless body provided little information, and for days, the mystery of her identity remained unsolved. That is until a breakthrough came from a man in Lake Elsinore who had seen a newspaper story about the murder. He contacted authorities, believing the victim might be his roommate, Kathy Ann Small. This pivotal lead quickly redirected the focus of the investigation, and the man was able to positively identify Kathy as the woman found in South Pasadena. According to the man, Kathy had been living with him in Lake Elsinore for a few months and had been working as a prostitute in the area. His revelation painted a different picture of Kathy's recent life, one that was unknown to her family and friends. He shared with the detectives that Kathy had left his house the night before her body was discovered, wearing the same nightgown in which she was found. It was a chilling detail that would later tie directly into the events leading up to her tragic end. The man further explained that Kathy had told him she was meeting someone named Bill that night. Kathy had mentioned that Bill had given her $50 to drive with him to Los Angeles, a detail that provided investigators with a potential lead on who might have been involved in her murder. With Kathy's identity confirmed and new information about her final hours emerging, detectives focused on uncovering the truth about what happened the night she met Bill. Over the years, detectives pursued several leads in Kathy's case, but none brought them closer to solving the crime. The breakthrough came 3 decades later when a sheriff's detective received a call from an investigator with the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner. The examiner had been at the scene of a natural death at a residence directly across the street from where Kathy's body had been discovered 33 years earlier. Inside the home, a 63-year-old man had been found lifeless on his living room couch. He lived alone and had no children. But the investigation into his home would prove crucial to Kathy's cold case. While examining the deceased man's home, the coroner's investigator made a disturbing discovery. Scattered among his belongings were numerous photographs of women who appeared to have been given illegal substances, assaulted, and possibly held against their will. These troubling images suggested a dark side to the man's life. Further raising suspicion was a newspaper article found in his bedroom, which reported the identification of Kathy Small as the victim found stabbed and strangled in South Pasadena in 1986. The eerie coincidence of the article and the photos prompted investigators to revisit Kathy's unsolved case. With this significant link, the detectives sought a search warrant for the home, hoping to uncover evidence that could connect the deceased man to Kathy's demise. Several items were recovered and sent for DNA testing, with the hope that modern forensic analysis could finally provide answers. The criminalists tested these items, searching for any trace of DNA that could tie the man to the crime scene or Kathy herself. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn. DNA tests revealed that the decedent's DNA did not match the DNA found on Kathy. Despite the disturbing items in his possession and the proximity of his home to the crime scene, the man was ultimately not linked to her slaying. His DNA did not correspond with any known criminal cases, leaving detectives with a setback. Yet, the investigation was far from over. With the case reopened, detectives decided to retrieve all the original evidence that had been held since 1986. The materials were transported to the sheriff's crime lab in Los Angeles for comprehensive DNA analysis, using advanced technology unavailable years before. This new analysis of the old evidence ultimately unlocked the mystery that had haunted Kathy's case for over 3 decades, providing long-awaited answers to the questions. On August 19, 2020, Slang detectives received a pivotal notification from a criminalist that significantly advanced the investigation. DNA tests conducted on the assault kit and the victim's clothing revealed the presence of DNA from 2 male donors. One of the individuals was identified as William Lester Suff, a convicted serial offender with a notorious reputation. Known as the Riverside prostitute perpetrator or the Lake Elsinore perpetrator, Suff had been responsible for a string of brutal slayings in Southern California. Suff's criminal history was extensive and horrifying. In January 1992, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop, which eventually led to his conviction for the end of 12 women in Riverside County between 1989 and 1991. His violent spree earned him an end-of-life sentence, and he had been on capital punishment for those cases. But Suff's criminal history stretched back even further. He had been convicted in 1974 for taking the life of his own 2-month-old daughter in Texas. For that crime, Suff was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but he was paroled in 1984 and moved to California, where his slaying spree resumed. After the DNA match in Kathy Small's case, detectives knew they were on the verge of a breakthrough. In May 2022, Suff was transported from San Quentin Prison to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Men's Central Jail for questioning. Over the course of 2 days, the detectives interviewed him about Kathy. During these interviews, Suff confessed to ending her life and provided disturbing details about her final moments. His confession also included admissions to some of his previous slayings in Riverside County, further solidifying his brutal legacy. William Lester Suff remains on execution row at San Quentin State Prison, where he is awaiting execution for his convictions. A press conference was held in August 2024. Lieutenant Thomas read a statement from Kathy's younger sister, Deanna Larson, who lives out of state. Deanna was 10 at the time her sister lost her life, but said that she sensed her sister was trying to get her life on track. She said in her statement, before she could take another step forward, her life was ended. The man who ended my sister also destroyed me, my family, and the family of others. I don't know why Kathy decided to go with Bill that night. I have spent nearly my entire life trying to understand who took the life of my sweet sister. I think of her every day. Moving on to the next case. Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a resident noticed cats playing with an object and went to investigate. The object turned out to be a human skull, discovered at the Orange County apartment community. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office responded and conducted a search of the area. Additional skeletal remains, along with clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber firearm was also recovered near the remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40-60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The sheriff's office submitted forensic evidence to Othram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. DNA was extracted from the remains, and in January 2024, Othram identified the individual as Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was around 40 years old at the time of his death. Larry grew up in the Winter Park area with his siblings and graduated from Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office encourages anyone with information that could assist in solving Larry Rozier's case to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.